Acu and Cataclysm. These two levels are some of the most recognizable demons that the vast majority of the community play as their first extreme demon. But that begs the question, which one is actually harder? Is Acu harder than Cataclysm, or is Cataclysm harder than Acu? To find out which one is harder, I'll be ranking them in 3 ways. How hard each part is based off of the GDDL, how hard each part is based off of the GDDP, and how hard each part is to learn and execute. So without further ado, let's get on with the first level. Right off the bat, I think Cataclysm's first part is really easy. I mean, most people, even without an extreme demon, even without any demons, they could beat Dry Out, and anyone with just a little bit of game knowledge would be able to execute the first like 7% of Cataclysm. It's not too hard. Honestly, it's not even worthy of GDDL status, so I would just put it at like a normal face difficulty. It's not too hard, anyone can execute it, and it is extremely consistent and doesn't really affect how hard this level is. However, things quickly take a turn at this wave section here. The vast majority of people, including myself, believe it is the hardest part of the level. It is a very unforgiving, tight wave section that many people are not used to, especially if it's their first extreme. This wave is something that you would expect from a level ranked around 22 or 23 on the GDDL, something like Sartix or something like Bangarang. However, it is not too difficult to learn, and since it is at the beginning of the level, you'll have many opportunities to practice and gain some consistency, especially because the beginning cube is not hard to execute at all. So because of that, I will be giving this part a 23 on the GDDL because I do believe it's on the higher end of difficulty, a high platinum on the GDDP, and an 8.5 out of 10 for execution, just because it can get somewhat consistent, but it is extremely hard, especially for someone's first extreme, for that part to get consistent at all. After the wave, it's the drop of the level, and for how hard the wave was, you would expect that the drop would be like some insane thing. It really isn't. This ship here that's playing right now isn't really too hard. It gets extremely consistent. Yes, there's a little bit of memory to it, but it's something that you would see on a lower tier insane demon, and it isn't really too hard to execute because it's just a handful of clicks. And this wave section here is extremely easy, extremely consistent, and paired with how easy the last ship was, I can't give this anything higher than GDDL of 17, a gold on the GDDP, and a 5 out of 10 for execution. However, the difficulty once again ramps up due to this ball section here. This ball section is actually a really difficult part, and I don't see many people talking about it for some reason. They talk about like the 42% ship and the, straight fly towards the end, but this part here I think is harder than both of them combined. I don't know why, maybe I'm just really bad at this part, but it is a difficult part and something that many people wouldn't really have practice with, or at least when I got to this level I didn't have much practice with this part, and it was really hard to execute. However, the difficulty does drop at this UFO section, and I think anyone with a medium to hard demon should be able to execute this very consistently. It isn't a hard click pattern at all. However, this is preparation for the choke point at 42% at this ship section. Here is the aforementioned straight fly at 42%. It is stupidly hard for no reason, and a big choke point of the level. Overall, all 3 of these little sections combined will get around a 19 or 20 on the GDDL, definitely would get a platinum on the GDDP, and probably would get a 7.8 out of 10 for execution. However, the level from here on out takes 2 significant nosedives in terms of difficulty. The first one is that there's 3 times cube. It isn't hard, it's probably around the same difficulty as the UFO prior to it, and the second downfall of this level is definitely this slow part here. It is painfully easy. It is so unbelievably easy. Anyone with like a medium demon could execute this part of Cataclysm. Yes, I understand that the memory ball part is memory, you have to learn it, but you learn it once and you remember how to do it forever. It isn't a hard part to execute. It is stupendously easy for how difficult the just first half of this level was. and because of that, I can't give this anything higher than an 11 on the GDDL, a goddamn silver on the GDDP, and a 3, maybe a 3.5 out of 10 for execution. It is really easy. However, the difficulty once again ramps up on this final straight flying section. For many people, this part isn't hard to execute at all. The base gameplay is difficult, but it's something that's very manageable and gets extremely consistent. The main difficulty of this section here is where it's placed. It is towards the end of the level, and it's the final hard part of the level. So nerves will be here distracting you throughout every minute click that you do. And I do remember dying here a couple of times, not because this part is hard, but it's because I was nervous. And I feel most players who do this for their first extreme will also feel the same way, because they know once they pass this ship, it is home free. You are not really dying to anything else. So because of that, I'll give the ship section a GDDL of 20, a GDDP of around amber tier, I don't believe it reaches platinum, and a 6.5 out of 10 for execution. To wrap things up, we have the final section of Cataclysm. This wave isn't really too hard. Yeah, I understand that nerves are at play here. However, this wave is really consistent, really straightforward. Anyone could realistically do it. I know that I did it when I only had like an easy demon for my hardest, and I was able to do this wave really consistently on mobile. So if you're able to beat a bunch of insane demons, this wave section, even with nerves, even with it being at the end of your first extreme demon, is extremely easy. It isn't something that you should have much trouble with, accompanied with the fact that the robot is quite literally free as hell. There's maybe one place that you could die to, and with the last straight fly being really easy to execute, hardly anyone that I know has died there. It makes this entire section just like an 8 on the GDDL, a silver/bronze on the GDDP. It isn't difficult at all, and the execution is probably just a 3.5 out of 10 only because of nerves. After reviewing everything, I believe Cataclysm is around a 20 on the GDDL, a platinum tier but a very low one on the GDDP, and the difficulty to execute this level for your first extreme is around a 6 out of 10. There are hard parts, yes, however there are parts that just aren't extreme demon difficulty, and is something that the majority of the community that have just like a little bit of demon experience could execute at any time. So without further ado, let's get on to ACU. Unlike Cataclysm, ACU is very consistent in terms of difficulty, and because of that it will be a little bit easier to get through. The pre-drop of ACU is significantly easier than the pre-drop of Cataclysm, mainly because Cataclysm has that really difficult wave. I think ACU's pre-drop isn't really too difficult to execute. It's probably around medium tier for an insane demon. I can't really give it much higher than that. It's very consistent, very easy to execute, and yeah, it does take some time to learn, especially with the blue orb shenanigans and the little memory, and I'm putting memory in quotes, part right before the drop. I think it lands itself around a 16 or 17 on the GDDL, around a gold tier on the GDDP, and a 6 out of 10 for execution, just because it isn't really too difficult to do. Like most levels in the game, the difficulty increases at the drop of ACU. The first half of this drop is not really a hard part in terms of difficulty, but it is hard to learn and execute due to a handful of clicks and it being extremely fast paced. However, after the duel, the level does get a little bit easier to sight read and just execute. So overall, the first half of the drop will get around a 21 on the GDDL, a platinum on the GDDP, and around a 7.5 out of 10 in terms of execution. As previously mentioned, the second half of ACU's drop is easier and a little bit more straightforward. There is really only one tricky part, and that is the wave at 68%, and everything else around it is relatively easy in comparison. I believe your nerves at this point do start to ramp up, especially after you execute the wave perfectly from 0, and does warrant some increases in points for the GDDL. I think the second half of the ACU drop does deserve around the same score, a 21, but only because of nerves, a platinum rank on the GDDP, and a 6 out of 10 for execution, because it isn't hard to execute, but you are nervous once you get past the 68% choke point. Now we're at the final section of ACU, and unlike Cataclysm, this part is actually difficult. With and without nerves, this part is one of the more difficult parts. I find it harder than the pre-drop to do, and I know a lot of people lose their runs at around the 80s or 90s just because of how nervous they are and how hard this part is to execute. Once you get past 92, it is easier. However, with nerves, I do have to give this part a 19 on the GDDL, just because while it isn't a 19 in actuality, with nerves you're going to be stressing out a lot. I believe it is amber tier on the GDDP. It doesn't quite reach platinum because that part isn't what you would be seeing typically in a platinum level, and I think for execution by itself would only be a 6 out of 10, but with nerves would bump it up to around a 6.5 to a 7. Overall, I think ACU is around a 21 on the GDDL. I believe it is definitively mid-tier for the GDDP Platinum tier, and I think execution-wise, it is around a 7.5 out of 10 for your first Extreme Demon. So, what level is harder? In my opinion, I believe ACU is the more difficult Extreme Demon. While yes, Cataclysm does have harder parts, ACU manages to pull slightly ahead due to its consistency. Kata only has 2 to 3 hard parts that can be classified as an Extreme Demon part, however, those parts are surrounded by easy to hard demon gameplay. ACU does not suffer from this greatly, as its difficulty is maintained throughout. I would like to make note, however, that if you're playing on 60Hz or on mobile, then Cataclysm will be harder, mainly due to the more prominent wave and ship sections throughout the level. But if you're playing on high refresh rate like 144 or higher, then ACU will be definitively harder. If you disagree with my opinion, let me know why in the comments. This is my first time doing something like this, and I want to continue this in the future. If you have any suggestions on how to make these types of videos better, or if you want to see 2 other levels compared in the future, just let me know. If you enjoyed this, then maybe leave a like and a sub. That would mean a lot to me, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Bye bye!